Hey, it's Katie, and welcome back to my booktube channel. This video is very long overdue. It is the middle of April and I still have not done my March wrap-up, so I think I'm calling this video my recent reads because this is going to be my March wrap-up, and I also wanted to start a new thing where instead of doing a huge wrap-up at the end of the month, I break it down into two parts. So after the first 2 weeks of the month, I will do a recent reads video, and then I will do a wrap-up at the end of the month for the last 2 weeks of the month. I don't know if that was confusing or not. Hopefully that made sense. But basically, this is going to be a long video, but I'm going to try to fly through these books. So the first part of this video will be my March wrap-up. I read 23 books in March. It was a very big reading month for me, especially because I was kind of in a reading slump for the first few months of the year. I'm really struggling. But I read 23 books in March and almost 11,000 pages, which is insane. So let's talk about those books. The first book I read in March was Terms and Conditions by Lauren Asher. This is the second book in the Dreamland Billionaires series. So this series focuses on 3 different brothers, and this one is about Declan, who is the CEO of this company, and in order to get his share of the will from his grandfather, he needs to be married and produce an heir. So he decides the best way to go about this is marriage of convenience, and tries to get married to this stranger essentially, but the girl decides not to go through with it at the last second. So the other main character in this book is Iris, which is Declan's assistant, and in that moment, she decides, why don't I just marry you, Declan? And they end up getting married, and a lot happens because of that, but I loved this book. This book was a super easy 5 stars for me. I annotated a bunch, and I just love Lauren Asher's writing, so I knew I was going to have an amazing time, and I think I loved this even more than the fine print, which I didn't think was possible. So this is really good. I highly recommend you read it if you haven't already. It's also a slow burn and grumpy sunshine if you care about other tropes. Then I decided to finally start the Zodiac Academy series by Caroline Peckham and Suzanne Valenti. And when I tell you that I'm obsessed with this series, I feel like that doesn't even do it justice. I don't think I've ever been as obsessed with a series as I was with this. I was so invested in all the characters. Okay, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Basically, I read books 1 through 6, and I also read 2 novellas as well, and I read all of that within a week. And if you've ever seen these books, they are big books. I read all of them on my Kindle, so I was flying through, but literally in a week, I read all of those books, which is crazy. So I'm not going to really go too in depth about all the books because there would be spoilers, but I will go through and tell you my ratings for each one. Also, if for some reason you don't know much about Zodiac Academy, I know I was like super behind on reading it, but basically there are twins, and this is like a paranormal romance series that also takes place at an academy, obviously. So you get like some academia vibes as well, which is always fun. But basically there are twins, and they are long lost heirs to the throne, and they end up being taken to this academy, and they have a bunch of magical powers. This has like a combination of like elemental magic and just different like supernatural creatures. Like there's dragons and werewolves and vampires and all of that stuff. And when I say elemental magic, I mean they can control like water, air, fire, earth, like all that kind of stuff. And it's like a combination of all of that. I just can't explain this well. I don't know if this is making any sense. But basically they get sent to this academy, and the current heirs to the throne are very mean to them. This is definitely like a bully romance. They are like very, very mean to them. Like I was not a fan of it at first, so definitely give it a chance. It gets a lot better after book 1. but if like bully romance isn't for you, I would probably skip this series. I'm just gonna look at my notebook so I can like fly through and tell you what my ratings were. But for the first book, which is The Awakening, I gave it 4 stars. Book 2, Ruthless Fae, I also gave 4 stars. The third book, The Reckoning, I gave 5 stars. This is where I really started becoming obsessed. Like, I couldn't put it down. I read it in one sitting, which is crazy because they're very big books. Book 4 was Shadow Princess, also 5 stars. And that book literally shattered my soul. Like, I am still in pain thinking about what happened in that book. So if you're not ready for pain, maybe don't read this series yet. Book 5, Cursed Fates, I also gave 5 stars. Also caused me a lot of pain. I actually had to take a break after the 6th book. I had just started book 7, but then I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed a break because this series caused me so much pain. But I feel like that just shows how much I was obsessed with it, because if I didn't care about the characters that much, it wouldn't have been able to cause me that much pain. But I cried multiple times. This series really puts you through it. Between books 5 and 6, I read the 2 novellas. So we have Origins of an Academy Bully, which I gave 3 stars, which I know seems kind of harsh, but this is the prequel novella, and it was just a lot of background information, and I think it was good. I just think I would have enjoyed it a lot more if I read it before the first book in the series. I feel like it would have been a lot more beneficial, but I was honestly kind of bored just because you go from a ton of action and romance to just background knowledge. So it wasn't really for me at that point in the series. So I think it was just the order I read it in. But after that, I read The Big ASS Party, which I gave 4 stars. This one's really fun. This is technically book 5.5, and I had a ton of fun because you get to see a lot of Geraldine, and she was a character that really grew on me in the series. I hated her at the beginning. I thought she was so annoying. I didn't understand what the heck she was talking about, but by this point, I adore her, and this was just so fun to see more from her perspective, and I loved it so much. And it was a great lead in to book 6, which is called Fated Throne, and I gave this one 5 stars as well. All these characters have grown on me. There's so many different couples that I ship, and this series puts me through so many emotions. It's just so good. So that's what I spent the first week of March doing. After all of that pain, I needed to read some rom-coms. And the first one I read was The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. I was super behind on reading this, but I'm so glad that I finally did. I gave this book 4 stars. This is a workplace romance, grumpy sunshine, enemies to lovers. So cute. I feel like everybody's already talked about this book, but I adored it. I really loved Sally Thorne's writing. I will definitely be reading more from her, and I just loved Lucy and Josh. They were so cute together, and I loved watching their relationship grow and shift from their original enemy relationship. I was gonna say enemy workspace to where they were at the end of this book. It was just so sweet, and I just had a great time with this book. Then I read Luna in the Lie by Mariana Zapata, who is one of my favorite authors. I gave this book 4 stars as well. This is a slow burn, also an age gap romance, and this takes place at an auto body shop, which is such a cool setting. I've never read a book set at an auto body shop, and I had a great time. It was just such an interesting atmosphere, and I loved Ripley and Luna. They just were so cute together because Ripley is the grumpiest person ever, and Luna is just so sweet to everybody. And just watching them interact was really funny because he was still super grumpy at the beginning, but he definitely has a soft spot for her, and he also called her baby girl so many times throughout this book, and it gave me butterflies every time. Just the way that he treats her and cares for her, so sweet. Luna and Ripley also had a ton of depth to them, and they had twisted pasts and just a lot of deeper emotions than some other rom-com characters, so I really enjoyed learning both of their stories. The book I read after that was Neon Gods by Katie Robert, and this is a retelling of Hades and Persephone, which I loved. It's also a forbidden romance. And I have always loved Greek mythology, especially anything about Hades and Persephone, so I will read anything I can get my hands on. And this was super fun. I feel like the world building was very interesting, and it was a different take on like Greek mythology than I was expecting, but it was super fun, and there is some good spice in here. It was also like a little kinky, which I was not expecting, but I did enjoy this. And also I thought it'd be like all spice, but there was also a good connection between the characters, which was really nice because sometimes I need a little bit more than just spice, and this definitely gave that to me. The ending of this book definitely set up the sequel Electric Idol perfectly, and I cannot wait to move on to that book. I gave this one 4 stars. After that, I decided to read a few books in the Brutal Birthright series by Sophie Lark. I had already read the first and second book in the series, so the first one I read in March was Savage Lover, which is book 3, and this one focuses on Nero and Camille. And if you don't know, the Brutal Birthright series is a mafia series, and in the first book in the series, you see Callum and Ada and their relationship, and basically they end up getting married, and it merges the Griffins and the Gallows forever. So the rest of the series follows like different siblings and like their romances. So like I said, this one follows Nero and Camille, and it definitely gives Fast and Furious vibes, which was really fun. I enjoyed it. This was probably not my favorite of the series, but it was still very enjoyable, and I definitely loved like the racing elements. There were a few characters in this book that irritated me, but I feel like that just means that they served their purpose. But overall, it was enjoyable, and I gave it 3 stars. Then I read Bloody Heart, which follows Dante and Simone, and this book is split into 2 different parts. So essentially this book is a second chance romance, but the first part follows them when they were a lot younger, and it's kind of like insta-lovey, which I didn't really enjoy. I saw a lot of chemistry between them, but insta-love is not my favorite trope, so I just kind of flew through the first part because I knew that wasn't the point of the book, so it didn't really bother me too much, but it was a forbidden romance at the beginning and also had some insta-love, and then they end up getting torn apart, and years later they end up bumping into each other again, which is where part 2 starts. The second half of this book was a lot better than the first part, and I loved it because I felt like it was a creative take on like a mafia romance. I feel like a lot of mafia romances that I've read have felt very similar, but this one was a little bit more creative, which I enjoyed. Since this part was years after the first part, I loved seeing how Simone and Dante had changed over the years. It was just really interesting to me. And honestly, this romance was very angsty, but also very hot. I loved the spice in here, so I gave this one 4 stars. The last Brutal Birthright book I read was Broken Vow, which I gave 4.5 stars, and this follows Riona and Raylan. And this is a bodyguard romance, which is so fun. I don't really read a lot of bodyguard romances, but I feel like it's super underrated because I adored that trope. This is definitely one of my favorites from the series. I adored Raylan and Riona way more than I expected to. They have some of the best sexual chemistry that I've read in this series for sure, and also just kind of in general. I feel like this book has some of my favorite spicy scenes of all time, especially that barn scene. It's so good. After that, I wanted to dive into some fantasy, so I decided to finish my reread of Covet by Tracy Wolff. I recently got Court, which is book 4 in this series, and I've been trying to reread the rest of the series because it's been a while, and I want to make sure I'm all up to date and remember everything before I read book 4. And this is the last one that I had to reread, so I had a great time. I still gave this book 5 stars. This is such a good series, and I love these characters with all my heart. I don't really have too much to say because I've definitely talked about this before, but it's still so good. The characters are amazing. They feel like a family in here, and you care about each and every one of them so much. There's so many plot twists that play with your emotions, and this book definitely takes you on a roller coaster, but it is totally worth it. My fantasy kick didn't really last long because then I dove into Kiss the Sky and Hot House Flower by Krista and Becca Ritchie, and these are the first two books in the Calloway Sisters series, but if you've been following along or if you've heard of this already, basically the Addicted and Calloway Sisters series are intertwined, so this is like the fourth book in the overall series. I don't know if that made sense. Hopefully it did, but basically we have like the core six in this series. So Lily and Lo are from the Addicted series. That's who the entire series is about. So you read the first three books from the Addicted series and you get to fall in love with Lily and Lo and their relationship. And then in that series, you meet Rose and Connor and Reich and Daisy, who are the other members of the Core Six, and these are their books. So this one follows Rose and Connor, and I love them way more than I expected to. I thought that Reich and Daisy would be my favorite couple, and I definitely loved them too, don't get me wrong, but I think Rose and Connor might actually be my favorite. I'm not really sure. It kind of changes by day, so I don't really know, but I loved this, and this book also is kind of like a reality show because there is a reality show being produced about the Core Six. So it is a completely different plotline than I was expecting. I'm not really good about reading the backs of books before I dive into them, so it definitely caught me off guard, but I loved that concept. It was a great way to keep up with all the members of the Core Six, even though this one focuses on Rose and Connor, and their relationship is just so perfect because they match each other in every way. They know how to challenge each other, empower each other. They love each other like nobody else can, and I adore this couple with all of my heart. I gave this book 5 stars, and I also gave Hot House Flower 5 stars. This book focuses on Reich and Daisy, and I love them as well. Each of these couples is just so unique, and their vibe and the way that they care about each other is just so unique to them, and they all have very distinct personalities in my brain, which I adore. But Daisy is a model, and she is also going through a lot. She seems like a typical Sunshine character where she's super bubbly and sweet and like just, you know, super happy all the time, but she has a lot of depth to her and a lot of things that she is keeping from everybody that she's trying to deal with, and the only person who kind of knows what she's going through is Reich, and watching him support her and care for her and just try to be there for her is so like meaningful and powerful, and I love their relationship so much. They push each other in a way that nobody else can. They support each other, they go on adventures and are really crazy together, and it's just so much fun. I am really loving this series, and by this point, all of these characters really feel like family to me, and it doesn't really happen often. I know I've mentioned that a few times in this video, but it's very rare for me to connect with characters as deeply as I am in this series. After that, I moved on to Twisted Games by Anna Huang, which is the second book in the Twisted series, and I really enjoyed this one. This is a contemporary bodyguard romance, or a contemporary royal bodyguard romance, and also a forbidden romance. So you get the bodyguard trope, you get royalty, which I love, and you also get like some political intrigue because you get to kind of see what being an heir to the throne really means and what those people have to go through. And just the romance was really sweet because this takes place over the course of a few years. So it's definitely a slow burn, but I wouldn't say it's the slowest slow burn I've ever read, but you know, it takes a few years to get there. and it is definitely slower paced in general than I was expecting, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I definitely enjoyed this one a lot more than Twisted Love. I know people are obsessed with this series and they really enjoyed Twisted Love, but it wasn't really my favorite. So I'm really glad that I ended up liking this book a lot more, and I gave this one 4 stars. After that book, I tried to get back into fantasy again and read Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. I really need to learn her name because this is the second time I read this book. I decided to reread this because everybody really enjoyed it at the time when I first read this book, and it didn't really hit me as hard as it hit everybody else, and I wanted to give it another chance because I still hear people talking about man, I already forgot their names. I still hear people talking about Lou and Reed. So I really wanted to give it another chance because I feel like my tastes have changed. And I definitely enjoyed it better the second time around, which is great. But this is a romance between a witch and a witch hunter. So it's definitely a very interesting enemies to lovers because they genuinely hate not the other person, but I guess they do. They genuinely hate the other person, and it is just an interesting plot. I had a good time. I had a great... I can't talk. I had a good enough time with this book that I will be continuing the series. I haven't done it yet, but I already own Blood and Honey, which is honestly the main reason I wanted to reread this because I got Blood and Honey for Christmas, and I feel like I want to give it a shot. So that's why I reread this. I gave it 4 stars. Then I got to read an arc of Love from Scratch by Caitlin Hill, and I was so excited to be approved for this arc because I love a good baking romance, and this was basically following 2 interns who were vying for the same internship spot. So they were kind of competing at this basically a Food Network company. This was the perfect combination of charming characters, an adorable romance, and also a food-centric book. This book makes you want to go grab a snack while you're reading. It's just so sweet and also really funny. I feel like it's been a while since I've read a YA romance that I loved as much as this one, and the characters, like I said, are really charming, especially Ben. I feel like he is just so cute because he is super smooth and charming, but in an endearing way, and I just really loved him because you can tell that he is a great listener, and he was trying to be so supportive, which I really adored. He was really great at listening to Reese and making her feel heard and trying to help her find solutions to her problem, and it was just really nice to see. He was a very good hero, and just it seemed very healthy, which I appreciated because I feel like usually a lot of the love interests that I read about and that I love are maybe not the healthiest. So it was a nice change. They had a lot of great chemistry together and they were just really adorable. So this was a really cute YA rom-com and I highly recommend it. I gave it 4 stars. I don't know if I said that. The next book I read was How Sweet It Is by Dylan Newton, and I had had this book for a few months. It really caught my attention because it is a rom-com between an event planner and an author, which sounds like such a cute combination. And also I had been able to read the first couple chapters through a sneak peek, and I absolutely loved those first couple chapters. And once I was reading this, after I read those first couple chapters, I felt like it didn't really go anywhere for me. I know that sounds mean. I think this was still really cute. I gave this book 3 stars. I think it's adorable. It just didn't have as much of, I don't know, I just didn't connect to the characters as much as I wanted to, which could be a personal problem. I think this just didn't really have a lot of the tropes I typically look for. But it was still a good book. I thought it was cute. I thought the romance was pretty adorable. So I still think it's good. It just didn't really work for me as much as I wanted it to. The last book I read in March was Throttled by Lauren Asher, which is really fun because I started March with Lauren Asher and I ended it with Lauren Asher. So I love her book so much. I feel like Every single book I've read by her, I've absolutely adored. I actually technically reread this one because I read this on my Kindle forever ago, and I feel like I didn't really give it a fair chance because when I first got my Kindle, I just kind of flew through books and I didn't really give them as much of a chance as I should have. So I enjoyed it the first time around. I gave it 4 stars, but it didn't really give me a reason to continue the series. But then I heard everybody talking about it recently, which made me want to reread it, and I'm so glad that I did. In case you don't know, this is a brothers rival romance and also a Formula One romance, and I had never read anything about Formula One before. I've also not really learned too much about the sport before reading this, so it did take me a little bit to get into it just because I was trying to learn a completely new sport, but it's so fun. The atmosphere is just such a fun environment. I had a blast, and Noah and Maya, oh, I have a bookmark in there. Noah and Maya are just so great together. They have amazing chemistry, and the tension between them, so good. I tabbed so many things in this book. I loved it so much. Also, this book's adorable because it has little things at the beginning of each chapter, and there's a playlist at the beginning, which I love. Laura Nasher always does that, and that alone is worth 5 stars, but I think I gave this book 4 stars. I can't remember. I didn't write it down, but I will be continuing the series. I love it so much, and now I know what everybody's been talking about. Typically, I would end the video here because that is the end of my March wrap up, but like I mentioned earlier, I wanted to try something new where I do a recent reads video 2 weeks into the month, and then at the end of the month I will do another recent reads wrap up video where I do my stats for the whole month and also talk about books I read in the last 2 weeks, so that long videos like this don't have to happen anymore, because I'm sure it's not as fun for you guys. It's not as fun for me. It's a lot to remember and a lot to listen to. So we are going to dive into the books I read in the first few weeks of April. So I ended up being approved for an ARC, which was actually a sequel. So the first 2 books I read were the first book in the series, Not Your Average Hot Guy by Gwenda Bond, and then the ARC I got approved for, which was the second book in that series, The Date from Hell. And I really enjoyed this duology. It was really, really fun. This is a paranormal rom-com, which sounds like a crazy combination. I wasn't really expecting to love it as much as I did, but Not Your Average Hot Guy is super funny and sweet, and you also get the paranormal element where you literally get to meet a prince from hell, and he's super charming, but also not the sweetest sometimes, and you get to explore hell with him and his powers. It's just a crazy combination of so many different things. So if you're looking for a book that's just really fun and will keep you laughing, I would definitely go for Not Your Average Hot Guy. And the sequel, The Date from Hell, was even better than the first book. It matched that vibe perfectly, but made it better, and you get to meet some other characters, which I also really enjoyed, and I just really had a great time with these. Then I decided to read Indigo Ridge by Devney Perry, and this is the first book in the Edens, and I've heard a lot of people talk about this series, especially Larissa, who I talk about a lot. She's my favorite booktuber, and she always gives the best recommendations. So I bought Indigo Ridge and Juniper Hill, and I gave this book 4 stars. It was a really good read for me. It's pretty small, so I feel like I didn't connect to the characters as much as I wanted to, but I did still really enjoy this book. This is about a girl who ends up being a sheriff in this new small town, so it's really hard for her to feel accepted, and when she first goes to town, she ends up having a one-night stand, and in order to become accepted in this town, she needs to win favor with the Edens, who is the main family. It's the founding family of the town. And little does she know that the guy that she had a one-night stand with is actually one of their sons. So that kind of complicates things for her. but then somebody ends up being murdered on their property, so they have to work together to figure out what the heck happened. This book gives small town vibes, enemies to lovers, also some mystery. I don't typically read mystery, I usually save it for fall, but I definitely enjoyed the elements in this book as well. I feel like it was a nice backdrop for the romance, and I did enjoy this. I have a feeling I'm going to love Juniper Hill even more than I enjoyed this one. Then, once again, I tried my hand at fantasy, and I ended up reading Pestilence by Lauren Thalassa. I know this is like fantasy romance, but I was hoping that this would be a stepping stone into more fantasy. It didn't really work, but I did really enjoy this, and I gave it 4 stars. This is the first book in the Four Horsemen series, and basically, this book is about a girl named Sarah who decides she is going to be the one to kill Pestilence. So she tries to kill him, and then she finds out that Pestilence actually can't be killed, and all she did was piss him off. And so he takes her prisoner, and she's just stuck with him, and they end up kind of caring about each other, even though both of them want to hate each other so much. And it's just really interesting because Pestilence is like such a terrible person. He proves time and time again how terrible he is, but you really start to understand him, which puts this like situation in a weird perspective. And it was just a really interesting romance, but I really enjoyed it. This is definitely my favorite Laura Thalassa book, and I will be continuing this series. After that, I read Priest by Sierra Simone, and I gave this book 3 stars. I feel like I had extremely high expectations, and it didn't really work for me. I think I enjoyed Sierra Simone's writing. This is my first book by her, and that part I think went really well, and I did enjoy the spicy scenes. I just didn't feel like the main characters really had enough of a connection. It was very insta-lovey, which is not my favorite trope. In fact, it's probably my least favorite trope. And I definitely saw the connection between them, but it just moved way too fast. And I also didn't really enjoy that anytime there was like a bump in their relationship, instead of like talking it out, trying to get to the bottom of it and like work on it in a healthy way, they just kind of had sex. Like that was just how they worked with things. They were just like, oh, like we're mad at each other. Okay, we spent a few days apart. Let's just have sex. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it just kept happening. And I was just waiting for there to be a deeper connection, and it didn't really happen for me. But I have heard that the other 2 books in the series are a lot better. So I will be continuing this series, and I'm not going to like hold this against the series at all. But I did enjoy the religion aspect of it. I don't really read books that focus on religion, and I thought it created a very interesting dynamic, and it definitely added depth to the characters on an individual level, which was pretty nice. It just wasn't my favorite book. And then I read my favorite book of the year, which was Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. I actually filmed a spoiler-free review of this book. I'm not sure if it's coming out before or after this video, but if it's out, I will link it for you guys. But I am obsessed with this book. This is a small town, grumpy sunshine romance, and it's so cute. Basically, it follows Knox, who is super grumpy. He owns like a barber shop and some other small businesses in town. And he just basically likes to spend his time alone. He hasn't dated in years, and he only really likes to spend time with his basset hound. And then our main character, Naomi, I guess I shouldn't say main character. This is dual POV, so technically both of them are main characters. But our other main character, Naomi, is currently running away from her wedding because her estranged sister calls for help. So she ends up in Knockabout, Virginia, which is the small town that Knox is in. And she gets there, she walks into the coffee shop to meet her sister, just to find out that her sister called her there to steal her car and all of her money, and to leave her with an 11-year-old niece she didn't know that she had. So now she's stranded with this 11-year-old girl that she's never met, trying to figure out her whole life. And Knox is there to try to help her a little bit because he was there to kind of witness everything happen. and it's just such a good book. Like, I can't even put it into words. I did my best to describe it in my review, but I gave this book 5 stars. I would give it like 100 if I could. These characters feel like home to me. There are immaculate small town vibes. I cried when this book was over, not because it was sad, but just because I didn't want to say goodbye to these characters, and I will be rereading this book like a billion times. And then the last book I've read so far in April was Heavy Crown by Sophie Lark, which is the 6th and final book in the Brutal Birthright series. I wanted to finish this series and also be able to start the next series, which is the Kingmaker series. I own all of those books, so I've been staring at them on the shelf, and I wanted to finish Heavy Crown before I dove into those. And I enjoyed this book. It was probably my least favorite of the whole series, but it was still a good book. This one followed Seb and Yelena. I don't know how to pronounce her name for some reason. It shouldn't be that hard, but I really struggled with it. But this is not my favorite romance, as I said before. It is very insta-lovey as well. And this book it kind of has 2 parts to it. I'm not going to say too much because I don't want to like spoil it, but I didn't really enjoy the first part of this book at all. Too much insta-love, it went too fast. I didn't really like it. But the second half of this book definitely improved. I definitely enjoyed it, and I felt like it was a good way to wrap up this series and also lead into the Kingmaker series. So for that, I did appreciate it, but I gave this book 3 stars. Okay, we finally made it to the end of this video. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you. Let me know your favorite book of the year so far, because like I said, mine was Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score, and I would love to know yours. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel, and if you do subscribe, please click the notification bell so you know when I upload next. Thank you guys so much for watching. I can't wait to see you in my next video.